Kalimera Sas, good morning. This session is going to be in English because although I've been here 20 years, I still can only talk Greek at the peripteron, so apologies. If you don't know me, I'm Fiona Mullen. It's basically my job to know everything about Cyprus, the economy, the energy, the politics, and so on. You can normally find me on Twitter. And if, unlikely, if you don't know George Pamborides, he's former health minister, lawyer by profession, and is famous for pushing through the healthcare reforms, the YESI, against a lot of local resistance and skepticism even from the Troika, I understand. But it's ended up being one of the most popular reforms that any government has ever implemented. So. But today he's got his lawyer hat on, and we're going to talk about how to address what one might call the flawed constitutional setup that we have in Cyprus. What do I mean by that? As I'm sure you know, since the withdrawal of Turkish Cypriots from the government in 1963, the constitution hasn't been fully applied. George will talk more in detail about that, I'm sure. So I'm going to throw some questions about this. You might have heard he has some ideas for how to address this constitutional problems. We plan, let's see, surprised that the politicians talk longer than they were supposed to. Officially, we have 30 minutes, but let's see. Anyway, but the kind of questions I'm going to ask is, what is wrong with the constitutional setup? How can we address it in ways that keep us on the right side of the international community, given the Cyprus problem, and the Turkish Cypriots, given the Cyprus problem, and the fact they're co-founders of the Republic, and to keep open the prospects of a solution, and finally, any specific ideas for what institutions he might change. So let's start with the first one. What's wrong with what we've got?
Thank you, Fiona. Good morning, everybody, and thank you to the Cyprus Forum and Oxygono for the kind invite. Let's start from to see. First of all, this was a constitution that was not the result of the proper exercise of the self-determination right of every people. It was a constitution which came about as a result of negotiations between three third parties, I would say, as well as the people of Cyprus. So it started in the 1960s. It was applied first of all, let me tell you that this is a pretty good constitution, especially if one takes into consideration the time that it was introduced back in the 60s. It's a complete constitution which goes to great detail, and it was quite modern for its time, I have to say. And it sought to create a functional state at the post-colonial era, which would allow both communities to work hand in hand in order to develop their new state. So the underlying element of this constitution is the bicommunal element, which runs through almost all the articles of the 1960 constitution. Therefore, all checks and balances which every constitution needs to have in place in order for to secure that there is a rule of law were shared between the two communities. In other words, the drafter of the constitution had in mind that each community would act as the counterbalance of any wrongdoing that the other community would or could attempt to commit. Now, in 1963, as Fiona explained already, the Turkish Cypriots' participation in the offices of the state was discontinued as a result of the intercommunal troubles back then. And as a result of that, it was impossible for the constitution to be applied, for the letter of the constitution to be applied, because the letter of the constitution provided that for example, for the Council of Ministers, it was 7 members from the Greek community and 3 members from the Turkish community. We had a president and we had a vice president with a veto right as well. At the Supreme Court, at the Constitutional Supreme Court, we had 1 Turk and 1 Greek serving along with a German back then chair. So the civil service was supposed to have a ratio of 70% Greek Cypriots and 30% Turkish Cypriots. The independent commissions, let's call them, the independent offices of the Attorney General and the Auditor General provided for the appointment of a Greek as an Auditor General and as an Attorney General, and a Turk as a Deputy Attorney General. The first Auditor General actually was Turkish Cypriot. He was the father of Mr. Tatar.
Mm-hmm.
And the Constitution provided for...
So we lost those checks and balances with the departure of the Turkish Cypriots, essentially.
All those checks
and
balances.
didn't replace them with anything else.
Exactly.
Yes.
So in effect, you have a state which is run by a constitution where all the checks and balances provided for that constitution are no longer in existence. Mm-hmm. Therefore, it is my proposition that any constitution without the basic checks and balances can only be and can only serve as a source of corruption, and this is what we are witnessing today, the failure of the state to inspire the rule of law, first of all to its citizens, but also to the European Union, stems from the very fact that our constitution lacks the basic safety net for checks and balances as any other constitution of any other modern country in Europe.
You said when we spoke earlier that constitution is like a Swiss knife, which you can either give to a surgeon or a bad guy. So you need to make sure it's fit for the bad guy. Right.
Well, yes, because there is a formalistic approach towards, but mostly by lawyers, towards any constitution. It's as if it's written in stone. Nobody should touch it. Mm-hmm. It's holy. It's a God-given document that everybody should abide with. I disagree with that. And the Latins used to say, salus populi suprema lex esto, which means, broadly, the well-being of the people is the supreme law, and it's no single document. So if we have that as a starting point, what we need to see is whether this legal document, which was given to us in 1960 and which was in effect rendered inactive by the law of necessity as we introduced it through the Ibrahim case, in effect entraps the Republic of Cyprus in a written document which fails to provide the necessary background for the rule of law. So what I'm suggesting is that we should take a step back, rid ourselves from all these preconceptions and the fear of what might happen if we dare to even discuss the Constitution and any amendments, especially pending the outcome of the Cyprus issue, and see what the real needs of our society are today, especially in light of the fact that Cyprus is a modern European member state, an equivalent, an equal partner to all other European states, and should be allowed to use its constitution as a catalyst to move forward rather than as a burden and stay stuck to the past.
So you had, when we were talking, you had an interesting idea of how you do that and keep everyone, the internationals, Turkish Cypriots and so on board. So maybe flesh that out for the
Well,
audience.
yes. Well, for those who are not lawyers, the Constitution of 1960 provided that certain articles could never be amended. They constituted the foundation of the Constitution, and this is exactly what was intended by the constitutional legislator to secure the balance of the two communities. However, those provisions were in effect amended by case law from the Supreme Court of Cyprus. The judges came forward and said, listen, since realistically we can no longer function without the contribution and involvement, direct involvement of and participation of the Turkish Cypriots, we will construct a legalistic solution out of this, the law of necessity, and we will proceed as if nothing is wrong to circumvent the specific provision of the Constitution and proceed in an unconstitutional manner to continue
So
applying
what should we
the
be
Constitution.
doing instead? Tear down the Constitution or write another one, or what's the...
This is exactly what the gist of the issue is,
Yeah.
and this is what I think we should be doing. We should be focusing as a society on opening up the discussion whether, first of all, the 1960 Constitution is alive, given, first of all, the withdrawal or the discontinuation of the participation of the Turkish Cypriots in the offices since 1963, but also the results of the Turkish invasion and occupation, which in effect ended any kind of hope for the future participation of the Turkish Cypriots unless there is a solution of the problem. So what I'm saying is that whether Cyprus as a state exists or not does not depend on a constitution. It's a matter of international law, and there is an external side of things and an internal side of things. So far as the external side of things is concerned, it's the public international law which will determine whether the Republic of Cyprus exists or not. Actually, this issue was determined by the Security Council, the relevant Security Council resolutions, but also de facto, if you look at what Cyprus is. Today is a member state of the European Union. No issue of statehood should exist after that. So we should first of all acknowledge that this constitution is not active since the discontinuation of the participation of the Turkish Cypriots. Secondly, we should also acknowledge that this constitution does not have any checks and balances which can secure the rule of law in the Republic of Cyprus. And third, we should recognize that these two facts lead to the level of corruption that we see today in Cyprus. And let's be honest, it's not just power corrupts, and absolute power, which is the result of the withdrawal of the Turkish Cypriots, corrupts absolutely. So it's no wonder that Cyprus society is declining, and the statehood is declining.
There is a paper I remember some years ago that said the most powerful presidency in the world is the Republic of Cyprus without the Turkish Cypriots in it, without the checks and balances. I think now Erdogan's caught up and it's now also Turkey.
I think there is.
But gets to some specific. Do you want to change the constitution as such, or do you want to sort of add? I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I remember your idea from before.
That's a very good question, and it doesn't make any difference what I want or I don't want. What is crucial is to start a healthy discussion of this issue. Stop pretending that everything runs smoothly. This, in my opinion, serves the corrupt system to continue being corrupt. They use it as a shield, actually. These people use the constitution as an excuse, as an alibi to continue doing what they're doing. And we have heard from the last session, I don't know how many of you were here, that it is not possible to expect that the executive power will also appoint all the regulators, for example, in the competition authority or in other authorities, and then hope that those authorities would be absolutely independent. So we need to face up to this problem and start a healthy debate about whether this constitution serves the well-being of the people so far as the internal issue is concerned. At the same time, we need to have in mind that nobody can touch the Constitution of 1960 unless the Turkish Cypriots come forward and participate in that change.
So how do we bridge that problem?
What I am suggesting is that as long as the Cyprus issue still continues and is outstanding, all negotiations which should be taking place to resolve it should be taking place on the foundation of the 1960 Constitution. There is no other way. If anybody attempts anything different, it would be disastrous. So all negotiations should be focused on how the 1960 state will evolve to a federal Republic of Cyprus, and therefore how the Constitution of 1960 can be amended to the new constitution of the new federal state. But in the meantime, we need to prioritize the needs of the society and the well-being of the society, and we need to provide for the so desperately needed checks and balances that a modern European state should have in place. So what I'm saying is that while discussing the Cyprus issue, we should, in the meantime, agree that our constitution is inactive and try to extend, in a way, the doctrine of necessity, the law of necessity, to include not just certain provisions of the Constitution as the need arises, but maybe the whole Constitution of the 1960, and proceed to park and freeze all the provisions of the 1960 Constitution and introduce a modern, functional, balanced constitution which combats corruption at all levels in order to promote the well-being of our society.
So would it be a separate constitution just for Greek Cypriots, so to speak, or would it, I mean, if we ever get to a federal solution, you'd have a federal constitution and two constituent state constitutions. So
that's not a bad idea, actually, but I wouldn't argue that we should be replacing our constitution for the constitution of a constituent state for a solution to be achieved in the future. Sovereignty is clear. We are a sovereign state. We are a member of the European Union. We should flex our muscles to introduce a law, even if it is not a constitution per se. Let's call it a new Magna Carta, let's say, amongst us, which will serve the people.
So it's let's say provisions pending provisions that actually work in a modern EU democracy pending a settlement, in which case we'd have to sort of think it through again with the Turkish Cypriots. Is that right? Something like that?
That's absolutely right, yes.
Okay. And we don't have loads of time, but you had a specific idea. I mean, you had many ideas, but let's say one of them for the checks and balances. How do you get round the fact that at the moment you generally have one independent person, or at most two? You made an interesting point about private armies. I don't know if you want to repeat that.
Yes, I honestly believe that all offices provided for under the Constitution, starting from the President of the Republic, going down to commissioners or to independent officers, as they call them, the Attorney General or the Auditor General. Without the checks and balances, we are left with one or maximum two people. The wisdom of, hoping that their wisdom would suffice to keep the country on track. I don't think that any horse can self-constrain itself when running on a course. You need to have the wisdom of collective organs rather than the wisdom of the one.
So not just one. So you mean 10 Odysseus, not just one?
Well, it's not just Odysseus, it's everyone.
I'm kidding.
It's, you could have a court of auditors instead
Yeah,
of
yeah.
an auditor general.
It might reduce the tensions as well between the different.
Of course, and it will depend. It's a small society. People get personal, as it was stated in the last session. Everybody knows everyone. So you need to provide all the checks and balances, not just to make sure that you function properly, but also to appear to be functioning properly.
And then who appoints, let's say, a court of auditors? It shouldn't just be the president, right?
Of course not.
Right.
In a modern state, first of all, there might not be a president. We might have a prime minister. We might decide, and it's the right of every people to determine the modus operandi of its constitutional order. We might decide that for the case of Cyprus, the presidential system is not a good system. And we might decide that we need a parliamentary system where the executive power will depend on the vote of confidence of the parliament. But maybe not. Maybe we would decide to stick to the presidential system. It's not for me to suggest this. This is a process. We just need to start debating about it. Even commencing the debate will have beneficial impact. First of all, to making Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots realize that we need to resolve the Cyprus issue, to make them understand how compelling it is to get out of this limbo and proceed with a solution. And secondly, to provide the people with the safeguards of a non-corrupt, modern, functioning state which serves the needs of the people and not the needs of the elite.
Interestingly, there was a comment on Facebook by a Turkish Cypriot I was looking at this morning saying, we sit here and we wait for the Cyprus problem to be solved and we don't fix anything. And we use that as our excuse. So, we've got, if I'm going to strictly finish at 12, we don't have a lot of time, but let's say I'll take 3 questions and wait for the mic because it's online. But if anyone has any questions, please put up their hand. Okay, we have Panis at the front.
Hi, Panis. I'm an innovation blogger. Actually, the idea is almost innovative and disruptive, to be honest. Kudos on that. But okay, I missed the early beginning of the discussion. I don't know if you have discussed about the risk, what risk involves this, and how we mitigate these risks, because there are risks to go and touch the Constitution. There is political risk, there is.
Shall we take one question?
Yeah. Well, actually, yeah, to keep up the time, let's take 3 questions and then we'll, okay, so that.
Yes, in the system that you're proposing, how are human rights safeguarded by the state or by the communal authority? And if a person doesn't identify with one of the communal authorities, how are their rights safeguarded?
Okay.
And anyone else? We've got one other question. I'll just repeat the 3.
Because of the current situation with half of Cyprus basically being under Turkish rule, it was mentioned yesterday in another speech that the constitution cannot change entirely because there are some articles in the constitution that actually make sure that one day Cyprus will be reunited. Not reunited, but it will be whole again. So do you think that changing the president to a prime minister would be possible without changing the entire constitution?
Okay.
So let me just sum up. I think the first 2 questions are quite similar, if I'm not mistaken. So there's, what are the risks of changing the constitution and can you change it given some of them are fundamental? Okay. What about the rights of communities who are neither, let's say, Greeks, Cypriots or Turkish Cypriots don't identify as such? And one more question, and then we'll go.
Just a small question for Mr. Pamborides. As an influential politician, how would you initiate such a dialogue or debate regarding the new constitution?
You just did.
Thank you very much. Let me start from the third question. As I said at the beginning, I do not believe that any legal document can be seen as a God-given, as the Ten Commandments, let's say. I think documents should serve the well-being of people and not the other way around. People should not become slaves to documents. At this stage, I believe Cyprus is enslaved in the non-active constitution of 1960, because I wish the constitution was active and the Turkish Cypriots were participating and we were here debating whether we should, the two of us, Turks and Greek Cypriots, should combine our efforts to jointly decide whether we need changes in our constitution and then impose them through our sovereignty. This is not the case. So let's be pragmatic. So far as what I'm proposing, only the state is an object of international law. So the only guarantor of the implementation and imposition of any human rights in Cyprus can and has to be the state. It cannot derive from any other source of authority. All other authorities are subdued in the statehood and nothing, nowhere else. Otherwise, we would be talking about a possible co-federation, and this is not at least what I am advocating. So far as innovation is concerned, my friend, I believe that what has kept Cyprus back all these years is our reactionarism, our fear of any kind of change. We are extremely conservative, and we fail to understand the potential, especially of our youth. I believe Cyprus is well placed to achieve great things, and I believe it should not be dragged down by people who drafted the constitution 65 years ago behind closed doors in the absence of the Greek and Turkish Cypriot communities. I believe we should engage the citizens and empower them, and that's what I plan to advocate in the next months or so, empowering the citizens on both sides of the Green Line to demand what's theirs, their power, to change their own futures. That's it.
Good. So if I can sum up, I'd say you're not saying we do away with the Constitution, but recognize there are parts of it that are not active, and use the doctrine of necessity to create, let's say, new features of it that are fit for an EU democracy in the 21st century with the participation and so on. But yeah, all of this pending a federal settlement of the Cyprus problem.
Yes, keep in mind that, as I said at the beginning, this is just the seed that I wish to plant so that the wisdom, the collective wisdom of all those who are in a position to contribute will come and create the conditions for a healthy debate which will lead to the change. I'm not presenting myself as a messiah who has a solution to give to anyone. This is just my idea of how we should disentangle ourselves from this, shall I say, tough spot that we found ourselves in because of what the way we messed up our freedom and liberty since 1960.
Oh, okay. We cut off 5 minutes, so I hope that's okay. Thank you, and thanks very much.